Coming to you live and direct from the Cape Town International Convention Centre, which is, of course, now a parliamentary precinct. And this, of course, is where the first sitting of Parliament is going to take place, much anticipated for the 7th Parliament. And that is because of the election results that were delivered 2 weeks ago. And, of course, within the 14 days, because after the declaration of the election results by the IEC, the first sitting of Parliament has to happen within 14 days. And that takes us, I think, until Sunday at the latest. So here we are today, the first sitting for the National Assembly, and of course tomorrow will be the first sitting for the National Council of Provinces. We also have provincial legislatures having their first sittings. We saw the Western Cape yesterday, few taking place today as well, and of course they all also have to sit within those 14 days. And then after the elections here in the National Assembly, where the President will be elected today, we will then have 5 days for the inauguration. So the inauguration will take place on Wednesday, and that is as per the constitutional provisions in the Republic of South Africa. Well, I'm joined now here at Parliament by Professor Pierre de Vos, who's a constitutional law expert. Thanks so much for coming through. Yes. Exciting times, Prof.
It's very exciting. It's uncharted. The cliche is used in that way. What we know is that there will be an election, that somebody will be elected president, speaker, deputy speaker, but everything else we really don't know. What would make it specifically interesting today is that the Constitution Schedule 3 requires the election for the 3 posts to be by secret ballot. So we are not necessarily going to know whether the members of Parliament are going to follow fully the direction given by the leadership of their parties and who to vote for the various posts.
And that's a very important point, but also an interesting one, because we know there have been a lot of discussions, a lot of bilateral discussions between the parties. We know that they still haven't concluded those talks. And of course, they don't necessarily have to. They do in a sense in that they want to have direction in terms of what the coalition or the government of national unity will actually look like, and that will give some sort of direction. But of course, they perhaps still have a bit of time to figure it out, do they?
Yes, from the legally, constitutionally, the thing that matters for the establishment of the government is the election of the president. That's the only thing that is really legally matters, because the president heads the executive and the president appoints the cabinet members. So the negotiations is really about that decision that the person elected president is going to make after his or her election. Who's in the cabinet, how will it work, what the policies are. These are not something that is really constitutionally regulated. It is for the president as the head of the executive to do. Of course, if the president does something that the majority of the National Assembly members don't like, he can be she can be voted out in a vote of no confidence, which is why there has to be some kind of agreement between parties that make up a majority. Otherwise, the government is going to be very unstable. It might still be unstable, but then it will really be unstable.
And that's an interesting point, because even if you have a government of national unity, if they don't have anything binding, it's still going to be a cause for quite a bit of instability.
Yes, so there's firstly the issue that there should be agreement, that the agreement should be made public so that the parties can be held accountable. And in making the agreement, it is not so much about an enforceable legal document, because I think lawyers, we are still wondering what the legal power of that agreement will be, but it's to build trust, to try and create rules. When can we vote against the government if we're in a coalition but we disagree with them? When can we exit the coalition? How can we criticize? In what way? How decisions in the cabinet be taken? Is it a majority vote? Is it consensus seeking but majority vote. All of those things really should be hammered out for this coalition, if there's going to be coalition, to be working properly.
And that's going to be very interesting, because if you take the Democratic Alliance, for example, if we look at the sixth administration and prior administrations, they were the party that voted against ANC the most, ANC policy. So the mind boggles as to how is this going to work going forward. Let me give you a simple example. The Pala matter, for example. If that is put back on the table, how does the DA navigate that?
Yes, so I am not really competent to speak about what the DA may and may not do. What I think in terms of for a coalition to work, there should be principled agreement between the coalition partners about what kind of opposition, if you will, they are permitted to show while being part of the government, that they are also in some ways, obviously as a different party, opposes. Without that, there will be a crisis every few weeks, because there's always going to be something that the DA or other parties in the coalition are going to want to tell their voters they really don't like and they don't agree. So if there's no such agreement, it is going to be very interesting.
It certainly is. And then, of course, we saw the Chief Justice publishing amendments for today's sitting. So what is your take on that, and how do you think that is going to facilitate today's proceedings?
So in terms of Schedule 3, the Chief Justice can issue regulations for how the sitting that he is chairing, that he is acting like the Speaker really, to regulate it. He issued regulations earlier, which was just very practical things. Now it looks like, in anticipation or just preparing for the possibility that there might be disruption. Firstly, the kind of disruption all of us that have seen the National Assembly on TV, objections, points of order and so on, how to deal with that. And if there is then an attempt to delay or collapse the proceedings, to get parliamentary security officers unarmed, it at least say, to remove those people, for there to be a pause, for the House to pause until calm is restored and so on. The aim obviously is to make sure that the election happens today, because it needs to happen today or at least by Sunday, and it is a kind of preemptive measure in case MPs decide that they really don't want this process to go forward.
So then, of course, we have the three positions that have to be elected today: the Speaker, the Deputy Speaker, and the President. Now, of course, the election of the Speaker, once again, there may be more than one candidate that may be nominated. So just talk to us about that process and how that ultimately unfolds.
So the process for the election is the same for the three, and what the Constitution says is, if there are one candidate, that person is elected. If there are two candidates, there is a secret ballot vote, and the person with the majority of the votes, absolute majority of the votes, not of the people present or of the 400, the size of the National Assembly, but the people who vote, absolute majority, that person wins. If three people are candidates and no candidate gets an absolute majority of the votes in the first round, the person with the fewest votes is eliminated, and there's another round of voting. So if there are many candidates, we might be sitting here for into the night tonight.
Well, and this is a very real possibility for the first time that we could see that, because we don't know what the political parties are planning. But of course, also then, as per the constitutional provisions, we then have 5 days for the president to be inaugurated, and then the appointment of a cabinet. Constitution, what does it say about that, and in terms of how soon that needs to happen?
So obviously the cabinet, once the new president comes in, that cabinet is no longer in office. So then we don't really have a government, we just have the president. There's no provision explicitly in the Constitution that says the President must then appoint a cabinet within so many days. There's a provision in the Constitution that says the President or anybody who exercises powers in terms of the Constitution has to do so speedily and without delay. But what does that mean in the context where there's no coalition? We don't know. So if there's not going to be an agreement likely for weeks or months, the President will have to appoint at least a caretaker government for the interim until there is an agreement. That is possible because once elected, even if there's no majority support for the government formation, the President can form the government but can then change it if there then after a month, 2 months, 3 months, there is an agreement on a coalition.
So it's all going to be very interesting just moving into the next phase. And then, of course, there's the National Council of Provinces. And they, of course, will be having their first sitting in the same venue tomorrow.
Yes, so the National Council of Provinces with 10 delegates from each province that are selected proportional to how well the parties did in the provincial legislature. They will be sworn in tomorrow. In that sitting, the ANC also doesn't have a majority, but although the gap is slightly smaller, it's a complicated thing, but the National Council of Provinces, when it's dealing with issues affecting the provinces, they vote per province, not the 10 people don't have individual votes. Then we get a mandate from the provincial legislature. So every time there's an issue, the provincial legislature, if it's hung like Gauteng, they will have to now decide, are we supporting this or not? It might create another kind of conflict unless, of course, again, there is a solid coalition agreement that also includes the provinces.
Well, we'll leave it there for now. Professor Pierre de Vos with us here in our makeshift studio here at Parliament at the Cape Town International Convention Centre.